So we're working through the book of Proverbs, so you might want to open there to Proverbs. The worth and way of wisdom, I've called this message. Proverbs, you can open up to chapter 1, I suppose. Our lives are the most precious gift we have. If you think about it, everything that we enjoy, everything that we long for, all the riches that we have, is housed in this one little package called our life, right? All our dreams, all our hopes, all our goals, all our accomplishments, everything is housed in this package. So I just want you for a moment to use your imagination and picture your life as a package, a bag, a parcel, if you would. Some people's lives, picture it, are full, long, full of joy, full of delights, full of significance. They're like these large shopping bags that you sometimes see people carrying at the mall, right? And you can just see the excitement, the delight on their faces, the anticipation, because of how they're looking forward to unpacking what's in here and enjoying it. Other people's lives are short and empty. There's nothing much to them. They're like those plastic shopping bags which hang limp and light, tattered and broken and sun-scorched. They're just kind of like blowing there in the wind, stuck up against some barbed wire fence, holes in it, just polluting the planet. You get the picture? Do you have those two pictures? Now, which best describes your life? That's why we're studying Proverbs. Because we don't get to determine the size of our bag or the type of bag we have, but we do get to determine what we put in it. The wisdom of God tells us how to fill our bags with delights and enduring things and precious things. The folly of the world damages and destroys the bag until it's good for nothing. Our lives all start out, in a sense, fresh and crisp, so much potential in them. And so many end up as unsightly litter just strewn across the landscape. So we study in the book of Proverbs because we want to learn how to fill our lives, our bags, with the fullness of God's riches. That's the bottom line. The book is structured very neatly in 6 sections, as we've seen last week. The Proverbs of Solomon in chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 10, verse 1. The sayings of the wise in chapter 22, verse 17. The wisdom of Solomon, collected by Hezekiah in chapter 25 and verse 1. The words of Agur in chapter 30, and the words of Lemuel in 31. So the first section of Proverbs then is really running from chapter 1 to chapter 9, forms a kind of a prologue or an introduction to the book as a whole, explaining to us the value, the worth, and the essential features of wisdom. It's giving us the overarching framework, the perspective that we must adopt about wisdom, about God's wisdom, if we are going to understand and apply all the collection of Proverbs that we find from chapter 10 onwards. So here's the overarching perspective. We've got to understand this, or when we go and look at the detailed realities of what it looks like in daily life, we're not going to embrace that. We're not going to understand it properly. So this first section is made up of 10 lectures from father to son, and 4 speeches by Lady Wisdom that complement the father's instruction, almost like a father and a mother appealing to the prince, the king, their son, to live wisely, to prize and pursue wisdom. 23 times in these 9 chapters we find this phrase repeated in one form or another. Listen, my son. Listen, my son. So last week we covered Proverbs 1 and 2. If you look at chapter 1 and verse 10, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. And if you look at chapter 1, verse 20, wisdom cries aloud in the street, in the marketplace. She raises her voice at the head of the noisy street. She's crying out. So the wisdom of God calls, and the wisdom of the world calls. And they represent two different pathways, two different ways of living, which have a very different trajectory. And we must choose what's the way that we're going to walk in. And we must choose one of these two ways, not just at certain important junctures in our life. We've got to choose which way we're going to walk in all the daily details of our life that Proverbs 10 and following is going to outline and fill in and describe. So walking the way of wisdom requires faith in God. It's not the road generally traveled. It's a difficult road. It doesn't always make sense. It won't always produce the immediate results that we're wanting. It'll often go contrary to the wisdom of the world. And so it'll require us to trust God. And so this morning we want to look at Proverbs 3 and 4, the faith of wisdom and the way of wisdom. The faith of wisdom and the way of wisdom. So here's a summary of the main idea of these two chapters. God's wisdom secures for us a truly abundant life. It has God as the center, faith as the fuel, people as the substance, and fruitfulness as its ultimate reward. That's what I hope we'll come to understand by the end of these two chapters. God's wisdom secures for us a truly abundant life. It has God as the center, faith as the fuel, people as the substance, and fruitfulness as its ultimate reward. So we're going to look at it first, chapter 2, the faith of wisdom, and then chapter 3 and 4, the way of wisdom. Let's read chapter 3, verses 1 to 12. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 to 12. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablets of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. So instead of working verse by verse through this section, I want to look at the two major themes which travel right through all of these verses. The first one is found in the commands in this section. There's a bunch of commands scattered throughout this section. It begins in verse 3, let not covenant love and faithfulness forsake you. That's the negative. And then states it positively, trust in the Lord. Verse 7, fear the Lord. Verse 9, honor the Lord. And then again, the prohibition, do not despise the Lord's discipline. So there's a negative followed by three positive commands followed by a negative prohibition again. So if we start at the beginning and the end, it's really these prohibitions. Do not turn away from God. Do not turn away from covenant faithfulness. There in verse 3. Do not turn away from God, from your love for him, from your commitment to him, from your faithfulness to him. Do not turn away even when he corrects you, even when he disciplines you, even when following him and obeying him and doing things his way doesn't seem to produce the results that you want. Because this is love. This is how God is demonstrating his love for you. This is how he's sometimes keeping you on the right way and preventing you from wandering off into the way of folly. Love God because He loves you, even when it doesn't look like it, when it looks and feels the opposite. So that's the bookends. The middle then are these positive commands. Verse 5, trust Him with all your heart. And the second part of that considers the alternative to trusting God. Leaning on your own understanding. So trusting God means trusting His instruction, trusting His word, trusting His wisdom, rather than your own wisdom, your own logic, your own understanding. Wisdom that comes from God is not always going to make sense. It's not always going to seem to work. Especially when you compare it to the wisdom of the world and how the world reasons. But this requires us to trust God and put our full confidence in His wisdom. Fear the Lord, verse 7. And in this case, the start and the end considers the alternative. What is the alternative to fearing the Lord? It means you're not wise in your own eyes. It means you turn away from all that displeases God. So you fear God and you do what pleases Him, and you turn away from doing things your own way and from doing things in a way that you know doesn't please God, even though it might work in the world. Verse 9, honor the Lord, which means that you give Him the best and the first of your wealth and of your time and of your strength. You show that the Lord is more important to you, more weighty to you, more valuable to you than all the wealth and the gain that the world is seeking. And so you take those very things that the world is seeking and using and maximizing, their wealth, their riches, their abilities, and you give those first and foremost to the Lord. You sacrifice the world's treasures because God is more important than that treasure. So if we take these commands together, these verses are encouraging us to put God at the center of our lives. The way of wisdom puts God at the very center of everything. A full and meaningful and abundant life is a God-centered life. It's a life full of God. Every part of it, every day of it, every detail of it. Everything we do, we consider the Lord and His place in what we're doing. What we think, what we believe, what we say, what we treasure, what we value, all has God as its focus and fulfillment. That's the one thing tracking through this first section. The other thing tracking through this section is the astounding promises. The way of wisdom makes great boasts here. Think about it. Verse 2, length of days and years of life. Also verse 2, peace, shalom, a comprehensive sense of well-being. Verse 4, favor and success. Verse 8, health and healing. Verse 9, wealth. In other words, it's saying, seek God first. Put God and His ways at the center of your life, and you'll have health, wealth, healing, and prosperity. That's literally what the text says. So how are we going to understand and make sense of these promises? Well, some people say, well, it's there. Name it and claim it. It's yours. Just believe it. But that whole theology doesn't match with reality, does it? Or with the rest of the Bible. Well, some say these promises are ours if and when we follow the way of wisdom. So inasmuch as we follow the way of wisdom, we will know these great promises. But inasmuch as we turn to the way of folly, we forfeit them. Well, that was the wisdom of Job's friends, right? You experiencing all this calamity and difficulty because of something you've done wrong, because you haven't been following God. And the whole book of Job is written to debunk that way of thinking. And if that wasn't enough, of course we've got Jesus. He lived the way of wisdom perfectly. And where did that get him? His life was cut short. He was falsely accused and executed. Well, some say these are not promises. They're general outcomes of the way of wisdom. If you do things God's way, then in general, you can expect these things: health, wealth, and prosperity. But obviously, there's notable exceptions. The problem is that as you read the New Testament, that makes suffering and persecution the norm rather than the exception. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, if you want to follow in my way, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. The way you saw my life go, you should expect your life to go. And so that whole philosophy leaves us some difficulty in reconciling the New Testament with the book of Proverbs and its promises. And of course, that's not how these things are put. In the text itself, it's put there as rewards for following the way of wisdom. So I think the best approach to understand these promises is to not look at them in isolation, but to see them in the context of the book as a whole. To let the whole book of Proverbs interpret for us what it means when it makes these promises. I mean, we're only in chapter 3, and already we've learned some things. If you go back to chapter 1 and verse 11, when we are not to follow the way of sinners, it says, what do they say? Come with us. Let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. So already there, Proverbs acknowledges in the world, they prey upon the innocent. We're not always going to be in that, we are sometimes going to find ourselves in that position where we have been seized upon and preyed upon by the unrighteous and the wicked. If you look at chapter 1 and verse 22, there was this appeal of wisdom. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in his scoffers? How long, how long? And then in verse 25 and 26 it says, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. And so we've already seen that the way of folly sometimes seems to pay off. The wicked don't seem to get the justice. They don't seem to get the judgment that they deserve. How long? How long? How long? But suddenly it does come upon them. And so if you're taking a small window and looking through just a small window at their life, at the way of folly versus the way of wisdom, you might come to the wrong conclusion about the fruitfulness of these two ways of life. Chapter 2 ended with saying, in verse 21, the upright will inherit the land, but in verse 22, the wicked will be cut off. That's the ultimate outcome. That's the end of the matter. That's where everything will end. But it's not the reality at every point along the way. So we've got to allow the book of Proverbs to interpret for us what it means. The key to understanding these promises is to consider the book as a whole. The way of wisdom has these promises as its ultimate reward. And they are sure. But they won't necessarily be realized at every point along the way. And they're not always going to be realized in the way we expect. Wisdom helps us to understand that the way God fulfills these promises is not like the world fulfills them. We have to let the book of Proverbs interpret for us what does it mean to be healthy and wealthy and prosperous. And we have to let God determine when and where and how we experience these. So let me give you one example, because I know your brains are going, what is he actually saying? Proverbs 17:1 says this, better is a dry morsel with quietness, with peace, than a house full of feasting with strife. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. So sometimes, according to the book of Proverbs, we are not going to find ourselves in that position of having full barns with the plenty described in chapter 3 and verse 10. But we will still experience the peace, the sense of well-being promised in chapter 3 and verse 2. Even in that scenario where we're not experiencing the abundance at that point in time, we will be experiencing other aspects, other rewards that wisdom gives, the peace. And the abundance we experience in that context is better than the abundance the world has, the worldly treasures and riches that come by worldly means. We will find that abundance, that peace, to be even better than what the world has to offer, which comes with strife. So the more we expand the window of our lives, the more wisdom delivers the full package. The more we narrow it down, wisdom doesn't seem to be delivering the benefits. But even when we narrow it down, we've got to let God interpret for us how His promises, how His faithfulness is being experienced, even in those situations. There is the realization of these promises, though maybe not in a way that the world would understand them. So the promises are here, and they are to be laid hold of, but we need to trust God to bring them about in His way, in His timing. The way of wisdom requires faith. God's blessings aren't always going to be realized in the narrow, materialistic way that the wisdom of the world conceives of. The book of Proverbs as a whole helps us understand this. What is abundant life? What is true wealth? Where do honors and satisfaction really come from? How do we experience God's version of these, even when we are maybe not experiencing the world's version of these? So in verse 13 to 18, there's kind of this poem that celebrates the blessedness, the worth, the value of wisdom. And it begins in verse 13 by talking about this blessedness, and it ends in verse 18 by talking about this blessedness. Let's read it together. Proverbs 3 verse 13. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left are riches and honor. Her ways are the ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She's a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called blessed. Blessed is the one who finds her. Blessed is the one who holds her fast. That's the bookends. Wisdom brings you into that state, that place of knowing and experiencing God's blessing, God's favor, God's rewards. The middle then, verse 14, wisdom gives greater gains than worldly wealth. Verse 15, wisdom is a greater treasure than earthly treasure. Verse 16 and 17, she offers true life, true riches, true peace. So the wisdom and the wealth and the riches and the abundance that is being offered here through wisdom is being contrasted to the wisdom and the wealth and the riches and the abundance that the world offers. And it says, well, what wisdom has to offer is better. So it's not the same as. It's not the same thing exactly. It is better than. What God has to offer us through the way of wisdom is better than the wealth and the prosperity and the significance that the world has to offer. Do you believe that? So on Saturday mornings, we've got this new habit of jogging with my boys. The three, some of them have left the home, some are in the home. One is my boy Josh by marriage, but we get to go out and jog early on a Saturday morning, and we talk about all kinds of things. Politics, finances, God, church, computers, I don't know, whatever. And I came back from one of those driving in my car, and I just was filled with the realization that this is true wealth. I mean, this is rich. This is richness that no one can describe. It has cost a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a lot of riches. It's cost a lot of time, a lot of effort to raise our kids. But real riches comes through the delight of those relationships. There's no money in the world that you could give in exchange for that kind of wealth, right? And when I began our marriage, Megan and I, we decided we weren't going to have any kids. That's how we thought about things. But the more we began to read our Bible, we were new believers, the more we were confronted with a different way of thinking, a different way of gaining wealth, a different way of investing your life. And I'm so glad we chose God's way before it was too late. Because now we're experiencing such a richness and abundance, even though it's come often at the expense of worldly wealth. Verse 19 and 20 is reminding us that God founded the world by wisdom, and he upholds the world by wisdom. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down dew. And the deeps there and the waters, an expression of the sustenance, the life of life, the life of all creation. All creation was brought into existence by God in wisdom. It's the principle that undergirds everything that God is doing. It is the very sustenance of life itself. God in wisdom, creating and sustaining. But we have to believe God's word. We have to embrace God's wisdom. We have to, even when we can't see it and how it's working out, we need to lay hold of it and follow it and obey it by faith. The faith of wisdom, or wisdom, requires faith in God. Second, the way of wisdom, or the path of wisdom. Chapter 3 and verse 21. Here's the fourth speech. My son, this is so important, he says, that I'm going to repeat myself. My son, chapter 3, verse 21. Do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, and they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. If you lie down, you will not be afraid, and when you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror or the ruin of the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence, and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again, tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason, when he has done you no harm. Do not envy a man of violence, and do not choose any of his ways, for the devious person is an abomination to the Lord, but the upright are in his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. Toward the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives favor. The wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace. We're only in the 3rd chapter here, and already you should have bells ringing. He's repeating himself. We've read this before. There's almost nothing new here. Remember to walk in the way of wisdom. It will protect you from the way of folly and the sudden destruction that comes upon the fool. Remember to walk in this way because it's so valuable. What is new in this text is the way he goes on to expand on this way of wisdom and describe this way of wisdom in verses 27 to 32. Here we get our first insight into what the way of wisdom actually looks like in daily life. I mean, he's going to expand on this from chapter 10 onwards. We're going to hear this over and over again too. But here's our first glimpse. What does it actually look like to walk down this way that he keeps encouraging his son to walk down? Well, it looks like this. Verse 27, do not withhold good from its owners, those to whom it's due. Do not fail to do good to your neighbor when it's in your power. Don't leave this good that you can do today. Don't even leave it for tomorrow. It's such a good thing to do. Make sure you do it today if you're able to. Do not plan evil against your neighbor. Do not fight or compete with someone for no reason. Do not desire or do violence to anyone else. Do not deceive. Wisdom has everything to do with how we treat those we live alongside. Righteousness in the Proverbs, wisdom in the Proverbs is about doing good to others, even to your own disadvantage. It's about loving others as you love yourself, loving others because you love God. Worldly wisdom is all about living for me, my own desires, my own goals, my own pleasures. Worldly wisdom uses other people. God's wisdom serves and benefits other people. We have to embrace this as the overall perspective. We can't take the principles of wisdom and use them for selfish gain. Because the essence of this way of life is that God gives wisdom. To walk in wisdom is to be a blessing to others. That's who God is, right? Every single blessing we have comes from God. It's who He is. God can't exist without letting all His fullness and all His goodness overflow into all of creation. And when He calls us to be like Him and to walk His way of wisdom, that is the effect. What impact is your life having on others? That's how we evaluate whether we are living well or not. What kind of an impact is your life having on others? Notice here, we don't love other people and do these things because of them per se. In verse 32, the devious person is an abomination to the Lord. The upright are in his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but He blesses the dwelling of the righteous. The key difference here between these two things is not what we gain or lose by this way of living, but it's how God responds to these two kinds of people. That's the key difference here. The wicked, what do they get? They're an abomination. They get the Lord's curse, His scorn, His disgrace. The righteous, what do they get? God's confidence. They're in His confidence, His blessing, His favor, His honor, you see. The way of wisdom is determined. It's a determination to live for God, to find God and His blessing and His goodness, to find favor with God. We're not doing this because people deserve it. We're not doing to gain some favor from people primarily. We're doing it because of the Lord and what the Lord has done for us. We're doing it not because of who people are, but because of who God is. We're not doing it because of what people do to us or don't do to us. We're doing it because of what God has done for us. Let's just stop here and say, we can't read this book without letting us point us forward to the one in whom all wisdom is found, Jesus Christ. Right, He is the one who took all the fullness of the glory of God and didn't reckon it as something to be held on to for His own advantage alone. That's Philippians 2. But instead made Himself nothing and poured it out, right? He is the one who, while we were yet sinners, gave His life for us. He is the one who's the way, the truth, and the life, and who invites us by faith to have life in Him. He is the way of wisdom. He is the truth of wisdom. He is the abundance of wisdom. He is the only way we can walk in wisdom, by trusting in Him. He leads us in the way of God's wisdom. And He teaches us that this way focuses not on the worth of people, but on the glory of God. We do this because of what God has done for us, first and foremost, and most especially in Jesus Christ. We do this because God has given us all His wisdom and all His blessing and all His favor in Jesus Christ. And we will inherit the earth in Him. No matter how many promises God has made, they find their yes and amen in Jesus. And that's why we can treat other people this way. Fifth speech, chapter 4, verse 1 to 19. This is so important, the Father says. Let me just repeat myself again. Hear, O son, a father's instruction, and be attentive, that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget, do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland. She will bestow on you a beautiful crown. Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it. Pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness, and they drink the wine of violence. Put the path of righteousness, but the path of righteousness is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. He's not covering much new ground here, is he? It's like I was saying to you in the introduction. The book of Proverbs paints in this picture. You know, as Westerners, we're very linear. You make point A, B, C, that's it. Listen carefully, because I'm not going to repeat myself. But a lot of Africans argue more like this, right? They paint in a picture, they go around in circles, they fill in a little bit more detail, a little bit more detail. They're repeating themselves, but they're also adding something new to fill in the details of it. This is what's happening here. He says in verse 3 there, when I was young, when I was just a sapling, the firstborn, the only son of my father, he began to teach me wisdom. And he passed that wisdom on. And that's one of the most valuable things I inherited from my father. And now I'm passing it on to you. He's saying, I taught you. It's interesting, many of us are more worried about passing on worldly wealth and education and accomplishments, even at the expense of God's wisdom, right? We're not engaged in passing on God's wisdom to our children and the next generation because we're so engaged in the worldly pursuit. Verse 11, he said, I've taught you and I've led you. We've seen this. Wisdom is not merely instruction. It's not learned only in a classroom. It's also learned and fully learned in the real world. As you show them, as you coach them, as you're an example to them, as you're alongside them. That's the idea. Because as he makes clear in verse 12, when you walk, your step will not be hampered. Wisdom is not about what you know, but how you live, how you walk. And so to really teach wisdom, we have to walk alongside people. To pass it on, we have to be in relationship with them. They have to see how we parent. They have to be a part of how we make decisions. They have to go with us as we try to mend relationships or fix what we've broken. That's how they learn wisdom. That's how we learn wisdom in the church. In the context of these relationships that we build, where we learn from one another as we see how life is lived out according to God's principles and sometimes how it's not. I think this is one of the weaknesses, if I could say, looking out from the outside at African culture, this to me is one of the big weaknesses in the culture as a generalization. There are exceptions in individual families, but in general, children are put one side in African culture. They're not allowed to engage in adult life. adult conversation, adult relationships. They're never included in adult business. That's right. That is how it is, right? They're never brought into decisions or discussions. African children are like kept one side. You don't go and ask or question. You don't have discussions with your parents about how they made decisions. You definitely don't engage in problem solving with them. Yet this is how wisdom is taught and passed on in real life as we are alongside our parents, as we are alongside people of wisdom and see them living it out, and then get to ask them and learn from them and engage with them and interact with them. At times in our family, we would sit around the table and discuss our budget, right? That was an interesting discussion. This is what we earn. These are our expenses. We want to go on holiday. This is what it's going to cost. This is why we can't afford it. Oh, is that what this is about? Okay, so now let's have a discussion. What could we do that we can afford? How could we get around this? And then the children make their different suggestions, and you correct some of them, and you listen to some of them. You go, never thought about that. This is how wisdom is learned. We've got to teach our children how life works by allowing them to come and be a part of our lives at every level, not just when they're 2 or 3, but as appropriate to their age, to bring them into all the realities of life. At some point, we have to let our children see how a married couple engages in arguing and fighting and resolving difficulties. And by that point, hopefully, we've gained some wisdom, and we're going to do it in a godly way. Right? Otherwise, we say, listen, we're just going into the room. Don't come around. But hopefully we can show them, we can teach them how conflict is resolved, how communication is engaged in. That's the idea here. Verse 16 and 17 describes the wicked there. They cannot sleep unless they've done wrong. They're robbed of sleep unless they have had someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. Of course, it's describing the wicked here. They live on. Their sustenance is doing wickedness. The question would be, is our sustenance doing good to others? Is that our bread and butter? Is that what sustains us and enlightens us? They lie awake at night, plotting and planning to do good. Do we lie awake at night, plotting and doing evil? Do we lie awake, plotting and planning to do good? Wow, mixing that up. You know what I'm getting at, right? Verse 18, the path of righteousness is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of wicked is deep darkness. And yeah, you get this picture. You know, when the early light comes from the sun, it's just a glimmer. It's just the beginning of light. It's just the hope of something much more full. But eventually, as this sun makes its way, it warms the entire planet with its blazing hot glory. That's the way of wisdom. Eventually, it starts off just a glimmer. It doesn't seem to be doing much, accomplishing much, have much strength and potency. But as the way of wisdom, as you walk in this way with time, its strength seems to grow until it blazes. And its glory and its goodness warms all those around it. That's the picture of wisdom. So verse 20, my son, be attentive to my words. Sixth speech. Let me repeat myself one more time. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. In other words, keep yourself focused on pursuing this way of wisdom. We're not going to stumble into wisdom. We're not going to find it just lying on the top of the ground like diamonds in Kimberley many, many years ago. We're going to have to search for it, dig for it, plan, ponder, apply ourselves to it, right? There's active, concerted effort in this way, God's way. Verse 23, apply your heart to wisdom, your thoughts, your motives, your decisions. Verse 24, your words, your speech. Verse 25, your eyes, your desires, your goals. Verse 26, your feet, your actions, your habits, your habits and activities. So seeking wisdom is going to require us to be deliberate and careful and purposeful about our thoughts and our motives and our decisions and our words and our desires and our goals and our habits and our activities. Does that describe you? Do you focus on constantly doing good to others for the glory of God in thought and word and deed? Do you plot and plan and scheme how you can invest your life in the life of others? How are you going to influence others for God rather than be influenced by the world towards evil? This is the abundant life. God's wisdom secures for us a truly abundant life. It is God as the center, faith as the fuel, people as the substance, and fruitfulness as its ultimate reward. You've come to church with a bag. And God has given you some wisdom to fill it with. You're going to go out today, like it or not. You have the opportunity to fill this bag. Today, you can fill it with the world's wisdom, or you can fill it with God's wisdom. And the end result is one of those two pictures. Which is it going to be? It's what you decide today. Let's pray.